Welcome to our daily reflection for this Tuesday, November 26th. And today, as we're going through on this week, we're remembering that we just celebrated the victory of Christ the King and the universal kingship of Christ that ends the liturgical year as we're getting ready next Sunday for the beginning of Advent. And here we are at the end of the liturgical year, and the readings are a bit apocalyptic. And apocalyptic is a biblical word for unveiling. And it's unveiling the tribulation that comes at the end of the age. And of course, these readings can get a little heavy on us as we hear about, as Jesus speaks in the gospel, about wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes and famines and droughts and all these terrible afflictions. And it's like, oh gosh, it's a bit depressing. And yet we're invited by God and the church, by hearing these readings, to have a supernatural perspective on these natural disasters. And of course, war is the beginning, and always wars lead to droughts and famines, and we can see how that naturally happens because of warfare destroying access and routes for food and for farming and other things like that. And so these disasters, in a lot of ways, are man-made. They're obviously, all of these afflictions come from sin. So Jesus will say in the gospel, not one stone will be left upon another of this beautiful, gorgeous temple. And that's hard for the apostles to believe, because this is one of the great wonders of the ancient world, the great Herodian temple of Jerusalem. And yet we know historically, almost 40 years to the day Jesus says that, in 70 AD, because this is said in 30 AD, 40 years later, that temple is destroyed. Not one stone is left upon another on the Temple Mount. Only the retaining wall that held the dirt for that whole hilltop is left. And that's what we see as the Wailing Wall today. But that Wailing Wall was not a wall for a building. It was just the wall that retained the dirt for the whole campus up above on the hillside. So it's extraordinary. Jesus, and I want us to focus on Jesus here, because the first reading from the book of Revelation shows Jesus like this, who is sitting on a cloud like the Son of Man. And so we see that he's fulfilling the prophecies of Daniel chapter 7 and his own words. Jesus stands as a judge. He's in control. He sends the angels out at the end of time for the harvest. And when there's a harvest, the fruit is taken, and then the shucks and the weeds and everything else is burnt. And so there's two ends to a harvest. The fruit being saved, and everything else that's not fruit is burned and cast aside. And so that's the fate of the righteous and the wicked. And so what we see here is Jesus is calm. He's sending out for judgment. And Jesus is calm with his disciples in the gospel. He knows about the end, and he speaks calmly about it. And he warns his disciples, and he knows that this is about judgment and it's about sin. And it's not that God is angry, vindictive, and wrathful. It's that Jesus knows the way of peace that he has preached to Jerusalem is rejected and will be further rejected. And he knows that by rejecting his way of peace, Israel will lead to a rebellion against Rome that will be destructive of themselves, and it will end in great destruction and ruin. And this is true for Israel, but it's also true for all nations at the end of time. It's not that God brings the end of the world, it's that humanity's sin rises to such a level that humanity and sin wreaks judgment and wreaks havoc and destruction, and God comes in at the end to save. And so that's important for us to understand and reflect on. And I think one of the things as a Christian, looking at this sense of chaos, is not to be panicked by it, but to realize that this is all within God's plan, and that those who persevere to the end, as we'll hear throughout the readings this week, will be saved, and that God is in control. That in the midst of human chaos, the chaos of sin and pride that leads to war and ruin and hatred, God is in control in the end, and the wicked will be judged. And so there's a consolation here, that the wicked will be judged. God will judge in the end those who are wicked and perpetuate these great evils, and those who are righteous will be consoled and saved. And so that will be really important. And of course, the psalm that we sing, Psalm 96 today, is about God judging the world and bringing his justice. And so there's a hope here in the midst of the judgment that God will bring justice. So the injustice that reigns in the world will not reign forever. And so what seems on the surface to be really despairing and dark is actually framed by light all around the dark clouds, because God has a plan, and God will bring justice to the injustice of the world and to the wicked, and he will bring consolation to the righteous. And so let's hear these words, not at the surface level of panic and fear, but of faith and trust in God's plan. May the Lord bless and keep you.
This daily reflection is brought to you thanks to the generous support of the Mission Circle. Join the Mission Circle to help Catholics worldwide understand, live, and share their faith. Sign up at missioncircle.org today.